Everybody
Okay.
preparing.
Okay, we ready? Don't be sorry. It's technology. It is what it is. Well, we'll bring this meeting to order. We'll call to order now and begin with Logan Blake with our Pledge of Allegiance and opening comments.
If you'll rise and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful to be part of this community, grateful to live in Santa Clara and to enjoy the beauty that surrounds us and the friendliness of our fellow neighbors and friends that live here with us. We're grateful to be part of this commission and pray that will bless us always to make decisions that are good for the community and for the future of generations to come. And we pray for that guidance. We pray for the blessing to always be upon our great town and city. And we pray for these things and do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Logan. With that, we begin this meeting on August 10th of the Planning Commission for the City of Santa Clara with item number 4, working agenda, our public meeting, which is to consider a proposed partial plat amendment for the Viewpoint subdivision, lots 4 and 5 located at 1854 and 1860 Red Mountain Drive. The applicant, Robin Linden, intends to build a home on lot 4. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. And I want to make sure everybody can hear me. We're still having with our new system here. And then I was told by Jared Bates, is Cody here? Cody Arnoldson? Okay, you're with Rosenberg and that's you, Robin, correct? Are you Mr. Linden? Okay, we haven't met face to face. So thank you for being here this evening. Just want to make sure. This is an application for a partial plat amendment. We have 2 lots that are in question this evening. So this is the proposed configurations of lot 4 and lot 5. These lots are part of the original Viewpoint subdivision. There were a total of 13 lots in the original plat. And I believe you each have a copy of that. It's just really small. Let's see if this will blow up a little bit. The original plat. It's kind of hard to see, but it's right here. This is the original. This is we've got lot 4 and lot 5. Lot 4 you can see is kind of more of a circular shape with frontage on Red Mountain, and then lot 5, the original Doty piece, is over here. So this is the configuration according to the recorded plat that's in place. And what they're trying to do now is create more of a rectangular shape, more of a standard lot that's rectangular, which would allow them to place a home further back from Red Mountain Drive. The existing lot and the new lot have to meet the requirements of section 1765050, which is based on the width of the lot, the yard, and the area regulations such as setbacks. We do know that the existing home on lot 5 would be approximately 16 feet from this property line right in here. Setbacks that would apply in this case, you've got, where I have that, the front setback of 25 feet for the new lot, lot 4, side yards of 8 and 12 and a rear of 10. So there's more than ample room on a lot that's just under 20,000 square feet to build a new home or locate a home on the property. Notices, because this is a partial plat amendment, notices were sent to the property owners within the Viewpoint subdivision, the 13 lots. No responses have been received by city staff. As far as our reviewing departments go, building department requires a geotechnical report for lot 4 at the time of building permit submittal, like we do throughout the city. Power department requires public utility easements. Public Works has drilled down a little bit on that. So any PUE on the current plat that isn't needed, whether it's in a side or rear yard, should be abandoned. Front PUE is required. So you can see here on the partial plat amendment, here's the 10-foot PUE along the frontage of lot 4. There's not a need for a side or rear PUE. And then they'll have to provide a final Mylar with signature blocks prior to a recordation. State Code Section 109A 608 includes requirements for subdivision amendments. To amend a subdivision, a city must hold at least one public meeting. That's what we're having tonight. It's not a public hearing, it's a public hearing, meeting. However, this is that wiggle in state code that we've talked about in the past. We have to send a notice out to property owners within the plat, and then we put a sign on the property, just making them aware that there is a public meeting because there's a change to the plat. It is not a public hearing. We don't put those banner signs up, but this is a little bit different. We've determined that all state code requirements have been met with the application. The city staff recommends that the planning commission consider recommending approval of the partial plat amendment for lots 4 and 5 with the Viewpoint subdivision, and that you do that to the city council subject to the conditions. We have a total of 4, and I'll read those into the record. 1, that the applicant be required to comply with recommendations from all city reviewing departments. 2, that the applicant be required to record the partial plat amendment and provide city staff with an electronic copy. 3, that the applicant be required to submit a geotechnical report prior to building permit issuance. And 4, that a primary residence be built on the lot prior to any accessory structure being permitted on the property. Chair, that's what I have on this particular item.
Thank you, sir.
I'm here to answer questions. We have the applicant here. We have his surveyor here. And then our building official is here as well. Cody Mitchell.
Commission, I went and walked the lot today and looked at the staking and the different things. Basically, what we're looking at here is the same thing we had a year ago with the Doty piece, squaring up Liz and Lyman Dayton's lot to match on that side. And then it appears to square the other on this side. Everything is in place and looks good to me. You're just making it so it actually is a buildable lot without an encroachment problem, right?
So this is what we were.
Yep.
We were looking at this last time. Okay.
Yep.
And this is where we are now.
The one we did just, yeah.
It's this section right here. It goes back to here. So any questions from the commission that relate to this?
They're just gonna abandon that existing driveway and just use the other
I
driveway?
think it's outside, isn't it?
It's outside of
It's
that.
outside.
It's just,
Yeah.
the existing driveway gets within 10 feet of it or so, the way it's shaped, I think.
Yeah, so just for the record, council, I own next door, I live at.
Why don't you come? speak
Why don't you come to this
the
phone,
applicant?
please?
I live at 1854.
Yeah, so if you come up, state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure, Rob Linden, 1854, Red Mountain Drive, Santa Clara, Utah. I bought the lot with the intention of building a home on it, and it was sold to me that way, and they gave me paperwork that filed back in 2012. On the building, I do all. But anyways, so then we went to the city
right through the middle.
and realized I had to do it all over again because the people who sold me the lot, the county recorder says, I basically know people, this is my driveway right now, I don't own this. But when I bought it 4 years ago, they said I own this. So that's where we are. So like he said, you do provide all of
Yeah.
the number 3, I've already done, said you have done. Just started,
Yeah.
I got a report.
And that's fine, but when you submit for a building permit, that's when you submit the geo.
We're like a week or so from submitting.
That's fine.
Cool.
Not on that lot, I apologize, on my existing lot, we're working on that lot on that now. But yeah, so right now, I would imagine my approach, is you brought up driveway, correct?
Yeah.
So I imagine if you're looking at the lot right there between 1854 and mine, I have this big circular driveway. So my assumption would be, I would just put the approach, I guess that would be the east end, closest to 1854.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yep.
that?
Mhm.
So the approach would be whatever my rules are, probably what 8-foot setback from property line, put an approach. I could cut it in curve. Right.
Cody will verify that.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Like, did you do something to this one already? Did they change?
Clarify, Robin, they were talking about the neighboring driveway and whether that driveway was on this new lot, and it is not. The driveway falls
It comes
short of
down
that new
in
property
here.
line.
Yeah, just, that's why I went and walked it today, because in my mind, I thought that driveway's on top of it. like you were saying.
And if you recall, the one we did last year was between
It
5 and
was,
6.
Yeah,
And that was because they wanted to get part of that driveway on its own separate lot and not encroaching.
Got
So
it.
that cleaned up that north part, and this is cleaning up the more
Okay.
southeast part of that driveway, because it is a funky driveway shape for that home.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
okay,
I'm good now.
very helpful. Thank you. Anyone else?
Nope, easy one. Needs to be done.
Yeah, this is part of what we do, folks, is clean up some of the stuff that's been here for ages. With that,
And
I'll
There is
entertain
a
motion.
history here that goes back, and the previous ownership and the sale and the title company going under and not
Yeah.
doing it right. And that's why we got Cody with Rosenberg back involved, because there was some work done in the past just to do it the right way and record this partial
Record
plot
this partial
amendment, so
plat.
it won't ever be in question again.
So we'll have a new
So,
Mylar
yeah.
to sign and everything.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion that we recommend approval of the partial plat amendment for lots 4 and 5 of the Viewpoint subdivision, subject to the 4 conditions as stated in the staff report.
Second.
I have a motion from Logan and a second from Shelley that we recommend approval of the partial plat amendment for lots 4 and 5 in the Viewpoint subdivision. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? That's unanimous. So very much it's taken care of. Okay,
And then we will be in touch with the applicant, Robin. We'll let you know when your council meeting is, and it'll be in 2 weeks. I don't know the date. We'll let you know. We'll be in touch with you soon. Thank you.
okay, folks. We try to make it easy sometimes, but thank you. We move on to number 6, discussion items, and this is planning commission training. And with this, before we start, I'd like to talk about some ideas that I've had and some conversations I've had. And I've talked to a few, and unfortunately, the 2 that I spoke to are not here tonight.
Okay.
But I think it important as we continue to serve and do our job, that we continue to be trained.
Right.
And recently, we've had some good opportunities to do such. So with that, I'm looking forward to this opportunity to train, but I also think that periodically, we need to take 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of planning commission and have a subject of training. And that would be presented by various members of this commission.
Okay.
And not burden the staff with it, but burden us with it. So we would take
At the beginning or at the end?
right at the beginning, and let me tell you why I propose the beginning. Because I think also it'd be important for the public to hear some of the stuff that we're being trained on.
Okay.
If you don't feel like that's applicable, I get it, but it's something that I've discussed with the mayor,
Oh, okay.
and I was intended to speak with you today, and my day ran out before I could get here. But we need, we're doing the very best we can. We're continually training. Several of us have been recently to the Utah Lands Council training, which was excellent. The book has been excellent for me to resource. And then Curtis found some training information online that I found to be really interesting that I'll share with the rest of you also. I won't tell you where it came from because I'm not sure we want to let you know it came from California. But anyway, it was quite good. It was very, very good reading, actually. So with that, I turn the time to our attorney, Mr. Hance.
I'm actually going to defer to Jim. He's got an agenda in mind, and I'm going to follow his lead. So
This is beautiful.
Well, yes and no, but thank you. And if we did the 5 to 10 minutes of training up front, it might be a good approach, allowing some of our applicants and others to get here, because sometimes we see them walking in 5 or 10 minutes late. I just don't want it to be a long train. Maybe we have something simple at the front, and then we could bring it back up during discussion at the end.
Perfect. Yeah, it doesn't need to be drawn out. I don't want it to be anything where we
Right.
dwell on something for discussion.
Right.
Just, our findings and share it with each other.
Okay. So I just thought we should have some talk, just open dialogue between staff and the planning commission. We've had some recent meetings that were interesting. And then that energy was carried over to city council meetings, whether it was a public hearing or not. Some of the members of the public found a way to get up during public comment and it's kind of tiptoe around the issue and still make comments. We had a fun one on July 12th. Kristen Walton was there that night. That was the night that they appointed her to the planning commission, and we had some folks mentioning a number of things on a couple items. One of which was Clayton Levitt's rezoning, which you had heard on May 23rd. And then he delayed that because he was out of town until the July 12th meeting. So that was on that agenda. The other one that was on that night was Neil Walter. And he had been to you a few weeks before in June, I believe the 22nd, for his public hearing here. We had a good number of members of the public show up to that public hearing for Neil, but some of the ones that they felt were more key didn't come to that, and then they stacked the room in the council meeting, which was a public meeting rather than a public hearing. And they started going back and forth during public comment saying that, why don't we get to have a public hearing here as well? Because state statute doesn't require it. It's to be done by the land use authority, which is the planning commission, a public hearing for rezoning, a general plan amendment, code amendment, things of that nature. And then it's a public meeting at the council meeting at city council. Now, council could decide at some point in time, maybe some items are more of a hot button type item. They know it's getting churned up out in the public. They're hearing from a lot of people. They could choose to have a second public hearing, but we'd have to notice it again. Put the signs back. Do you know what I mean? It's a two-step process. It would take a longer amount of time to do the double public hearing. So that's an issue. So there's just been a lot going on, a lot of misinformation, some frustration with the public when they show up and they make comments at the podium because they can that aren't accurate as to what planning commissioners said and did. In the case of Clayton Levitt's, they went after Curtis Whitehead because he changed his vote after going to the training. He decided not to buy in as much to the public clamor. He decided that the application was complete, that he had gone through it, that the application was complete and it was in compliance with our general plan. And he was comfortable recommending that it move forward to the city council to make the final decision on a legislative item as they are elected officials. And Matt and I have talked about the motion he made. So he described his feelings and reasons why, his comments as to why he voted one way the first time and the next way 2 months later. And then he made the motion. And I think they took a bit of offense to that and kind of went after him. So they went after Curtis a little bit and other staff and other planning commissioners as well. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. The other thing is due process, the due process that we have to go through. Every developer has a right, whether you agree or disagree with their application to rezone a piece of property, to amend a general plan, to ask for a code amendment, whatever. Due process allows an applicant to go through that process. In the end, it could be approved, it could be denied, it could be continued for lack of information. There's all different ways that it can go, but some of the members of the public don't understand that. And they're going after staff like, we think you work for the developer because you don't represent us and he's paying you. The city doesn't pay you, he must be paying you. Just kind of some crazy accusations.
We've
So,
actually had that comment made
yeah,
about some of us commissioners by
Oh, yeah.
name in written documents.
yeah. And we tried, yes. And we tried, and Matt and I were there. Matt did a good job of just saying, hey, they have due process. They have a right to petition the city for something different if they don't want to develop, as per the current zone or the general plan. And then, property owners and their rights, and then neighbors and residents, which this book I have a copy of, and Kristen, I have a copy of this book that I'll give to you.
I've already got one.
Oh, good. I have mine up on my desk and highlighted, and of course I forgot it. But it talks about neighbors and third party, the rights they have as well. And I just wanted it to be an open discussion. I'm going to defer to Matt now and let him talk a little bit and maybe just some Q&A, because to me, these are the big ticket items right now. These are the things that we're hearing over and over again. And we have some public hearings that are going to come back that are going to be hot ticket items. We know that down here in the historic district, a lot of the community is churned up over the Neil Walter proposal. And so the general plan went through, but now it has to go through a rezone and project plan, which gets heritage and planning commission and council all involved on the look, feel, and design of that building. And there's going to be a lot of opinions and a lot of pushback on that one.
See,
So,
and therein lies part of the concern that I have is
yeah,
they don't understand the process
right,
and they don't ask about the process.
right.
And so when we try to explain the process to them, they don't give and take with what the true realities of the process. You know,
Right.
we, as an individual, would have to go through that same process. So Neil's project, for example, is going to be a 3-step process when you go to the overall, because of, he did the general plan amendment, and then there's the zoning, and then there's the final plat approval. I mean, so it's not just rubber stamped.
No, it's going to take time. And just so you know, and I'll announce it to you now, Heritage Commission met last week. We just had the first meeting to talk about our design guidelines. The fact is they better address single-family homes and conversions from a single-family home to a small business, such as Uncle and Auntie's or Rylu's, the antique store, things of that nature. Not so much commercial. You know, there's general guidelines, but it's really big picture. It doesn't drill down. And so the effort's going to be in the next several months, probably to put some design guidelines in place that better address commercial for
Okay.
new commercial buildings. And this is coming from the mayor and the council. You know, Lena sits on the Heritage Commission, and the mayor is very aware of it. So they're going to start with a work meeting. It's going to be, I think, in early October because of schedules and Swiss days and everything going on. There's going to be a joint work meeting that will include Heritage Commission, Planning Commission, the council, and members of the public, and they're going to allow some of those members to speak. So this could go on for a couple hours, kind of a kickoff. And then based upon that discussion, what we hear back, it's very likely that a committee of some sort would be formed to work on that. Yeah, you know, and then come back with some new updated guidelines. We don't think standards, because standards are more set in code, you know, like city code versus guidelines. So ultimately, I'm not sure if they're going to be design guidelines or if they could be standards. But we're not sure that the politics are such that they would adopt standards. You know, we don't know. And Matt knows that history a little bit, because when he ran for council in 2005, that was one of the big issues. The folks down here in the historic district were all up in arms because of some of the stuff that was in place that was too restrictive, and they didn't want hard standards that dictated and told them what to do. They wanted some flexibility.
The guidelines.
Yes, so I'll roll the Matt now.
Can I ask a question about that, just with that being a beginner and I know what's coming, like with the commercial project at the end of the street? How will that affect him? He's on a time frame now.
Well,
I
his
think he has
application's
a
in
year
before.
to get that process.
Correct.
If the design guidelines aren't set, how will he be able to move forward? That's
He's
just
ahead of
one
it.
example. I don't know if there's other projects out there too.
He
For
will
what's
move forward,
currently in place.
because the laws that are, the codes and the ordinances that are in place are what we are adhered to.
Yeah.
And this is what we need to be very staunch
Yeah.
about, in my opinion, folks, is that we're doing the best we can with what we've been given. And nobody figured the growth. Nobody, you know, I've said this many, many times. If our ancestors would have had any idea, they'd have done the very best. And it goes all the way back to the very beginning when it was a town council. And they didn't want our trailer parks in the community. But I mean, let's be honest, that's where things really started to come into play, the town council itself. And we weren't even a city council. We were a town council at that time. And so we have what we have, and we've got to do the best we can with what we have. But at the same time, it's our job to plan. It's
Right.
as a planning commission, We are here to plan and make sure that things are going forward in the best way possible. You know, it's like some of the things we do tie Cody's hands, and there's no way around it just because of what it's done. And I just think that it's hard, and that we've been fortunate that we do have some professionals on staff now that can help us with these things, Cody and Jim and those, but the standards that are in place are what we have to march with until we get these others. And I don't like the word standards, I prefer guidelines.
Yeah.
But as a developer in other communities, that's what I prefer to work with. So.
Well, and if I can just maybe add to that a little bit from a little bit more of a legal perspective, there's a principle in Utah law that's called the vested rights doctrine. And what that doctrine says is that it's really common sense, and it's just about fairness. And it says that when someone makes an application for a land use approval, they are subject to the rules and regulations that were in place when that application was complete. So at that point, they're deemed to be entitled to a decision. So that's the legal principle behind what you're saying, is that, you know, if Neil was to walk in next week and file his next application, and it's a complete application, and he is then entitled to go through the process, subject to whatever rules and regulations are in place at the time, even if we haven't had an opportunity to, you know, to make changes to our ordinances. Or
It's gonna
to-
take several months. It's
Yeah.
gonna take time.
So
Yeah.
the city does have some limited options. If we wanted to take some time to make changes to zoning ordinances or guidelines or whatever, we have the right under state law to implement a moratorium for up to 6 months. The technical term for that is a temporary land use ordinance, but it's effectively a moratorium. Where the city can say, we're not going to approve any applications at all, you know, they can be of a certain category or whatever, until we have this opportunity, this 6-month window to revise or
you'd have
consider
to-
revision of our ordinances.
You'd have to put that moratorium in place before they were vested, though, right?
It has to be in place before they are vested with an application.
Yeah, and I
So-
don't know what timing on that would be. Haven't even
Yeah.
gotten
And
into
then
that.
again, that's a legislative move. That's not
Something.
not
that you
something that we would
decide.
deal with,
Yeah.
Yeah.
correct?
The mayor has expressed some interest in doing something like that. But, you know, that'd be something that the city council would have to decide.
But we first have to have our work meeting. You know, we
Yeah.
have to have this big
Which is
discussion, so
interesting
it could take
because
several months.
The work meeting
So-
was discussed, not the last city council meeting, but the city council meeting before that. So it takes time to get through all those steps.
It
Yeah.
And just so you understand, we will be a part of that work meeting. So the city council will be the legislative body, but we will be a part of it to hear the public forum and the different things like
And the
that.
heritage will be
And the
invited
Heritage
too.
Commission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So with Neil's thing, is the worry that there's not teeth to like hold them to a certain design or something? Is that what you guys are getting at?
There's so many things out there and the disinformation is being,
It's just really being churned up. It's
It's-
split right down the middle. We have one group that's gone one way and then the others, the other way, more reasonable.
and they
There's
both live
just a
in
lot out there.
the historic district.
I think the biggest problem is that the public doesn't understand what they're asking for sometimes
Yeah.
and what rules we have to do. So it's not necessarily a problem that we have here. Every time I run into people, I have people call me and give me a hard time about stuff. And I always preface what I say with, I want you to remember that you called me. And then I tell them, these are the rules that we have to follow as a city. And they have no idea about any of that stuff. They just don't.
Yeah.
And their in education is the biggest problem. They just don't want it.
yeah.
They don't want it in their backyard, whatever it is.
There's a sense among some members of the public that if they can be loud enough,
Yes.
that the city has to listen to what they say. And at a certain level, the city council has the discretion to listen to them.
They're elected officials.
They're elected officials. They can listen
we
to what
don't.
the public has to say. But the city staff has an obligation to review applications pursuant to the, the rules that are in place. The planning commission has the same obligation, and we'll maybe talk in a minute about why that is, but actually, there's a great chart in here, and I know you don't all have this in front of you, but this is on page 18 of this book. And it talks about the 4 different groups that are involved in land use decisions. And of those 4 groups, only one of those is the public. It's neighbors and third parties right here. You also have elected and appointed citizen planners, which is you and the city council. You have the applicant, the property owner, which is, the person looking for the change. And then you have professional planners that includes people like Jim and, others who might be brought in to advise. So, and it's a give and take among all those groups. And that's what the rules we have are for, so that we can do that in an orderly way and come to ideally a decision that's best for,
And it's interesting what
most
it
in the
says
city.
in there on the third party and the public, because it gets into, sometimes they're not prepared, they're not as educated, but they should be courteous. In return, we should be patient with them. But we've seen a lot of opposite of that. Recently, it's more like they feel like they've been cornered and they just want to lash out and go after us. And we're just seeing a lot of that right now. And it's not just a phenomenon here, it's a nationwide phenomenon. There's just been a lot of this going on in the world. I think people were behind their laptop or whatever, and then they came back out and they're just saying and doing whatever they want. It feels like at times.
There is a process by which the public can actually take certain decisions out of the hands of the city council. That's the referendum process. But that has a very specific set of criteria as well that has to be followed if it's going to happen. So,
Didn't they change that too? So that only is applicable if it's not unanimous, right? Wasn't that the
no,
news?
I don't think that's the case.
Oh, they talked about that in the land use.
They did,
They
they
did.
did,
Talk about
but they
that.
took that out. It's not.
So at the end of
unanimous.
the day, they didn't get through the new,
I don't think
because he
so.
talked about it at the land use training.
I thought a
that it-
unanimous
that they can only
decision
do the
can't get
referendum if it's
referendum.
not a unanimous vote.
That's correct. Before it was 2/3
And before
or
it was
75%.
2/3,
There was a
yeah.
percentage, but you're right. I got it just the opposite.
Well,
They
I can't
changed it
think
to
of his name, the
unanimous.
gentleman that authored that book.
Call.
Yeah, correct.
Mr. Call is the
Craig
one that was
Call.
presenting that information.
Yeah.
And I remember looking over at you it was the commissioner from King County that I was having a conversation.
Yeah.
And saying, have you ever experienced that? And he said, not as a city council member, nor as a city planning.
The one place that seems to happen regularly is in Virgin. I don't know if you've ever seen that in the news, but that's
That makes
happened
sense.
multiple times in recent years out there.
So it makes sense, smaller community,
Yeah.
much more in a
But it does have to be unanimous.
unique construction base.
It was either 2/3 or 75%. And when the statute was approved, they went to unanimous.
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked at it, so
Yeah,
that could be the
yeah.
case, but.
But it's interesting, the one sentence here, the way it reads, it says, they have a duty to be courteous and honest and to respect the time and investment of others, but they are often the least sophisticated and most frustrated participants in the process.
I can
So,
appreciate
and it's interesting here, it says, all in all, while the stage generally is set for a free-for-all, somehow the system works pretty well most of the time, so. A little bit of humor there.
that. I think these are important things that we need to learn. I guess my question comes back to council. How do we handle the personal attacks that, they literally attack us personally with things? There's a certain amount of that. And then, there's a fair amount of disinformation. And all we can do is our very best. And I like what you said. You called me
Yeah, remember, you called me,
because
so you will listen.
I've had people I've had more people confront me in the grocery store and on my front porch in the last 6 months than I've had the entire time I've served.
By far.
Well, maybe a couple of thoughts. Jim talked about members of the public who have gotten up here and made pretty serious accusations against people. And when you're accusing someone of what is essentially a crime, that actually amounts to defamation. And when we hear stuff like that from the podium, we try to shut it down pretty quickly. If, you know, if you personally are receiving those kinds of communications, you can respond to them on your own behalf, or you can reach out to me and let's
And let you come.
and let's talk
respond
about
to it.
whether a response is appropriate. You know, I think we want to first try and educate people, right? I think that should always be our first objective. But at the same time, anything we can do to, you know, diffuse what is, you know, potentially some pretty explosive, you know, interactions, we want to avoid that as much as we can. So let's talk. You know, if somebody is making those kinds of accusations, if they are contacting you in any kind of an inappropriate way, inappropriate times, interacting with family members, making threats, absolutely let me know.
Okay.
And let's, you know, let's talk about it. I can be a resource for you, you know, on behalf of the city, but then of course, don't be afraid to, you know, if you have legal counsel that you personally trust, don't be afraid to reach out to them if you feel like you need to.
I think during the course of a public hearing, it's fine for the chair or staff to say, when someone's being like that, you're out of line.
Yeah.
We're not going to take any more comments like that. Speak to the subject or sit down.
Yeah.
And I've seen that done before as well. And if we feel like we're going to have a real hot button issue, we can also have an officer come. You know, I haven't had to do that here, but I've had to do that in other places.
I mean, I don't foresee.
We don't want it to be
I don't
like
foresee
that,
Type
but
of issue, but
yes.
Do you think it would be worth it or of value to have a little statement that you read
At the beginning?
beginning of every public hearing? You know, saying those kind of things, we will be courteous, we will be.
Yeah.
We do have a written policy now for public hearings, which I think you guys have seen. No?
I don't remember. seeing it.
I don't remember seeing it. Can
We
you
want to make
forward
sure
that
that
to
these
us?
guys see that.
Is this the one that
It's
was
just
read
something you can say
recently?
before we start the meeting.
Well, in fact,
Remember the
if
guy?
you remember
I
the
thought
training,
there
he
was a-
talked
I
about
thought there
that,
was
in
a
the
copy
training,
out on the
didn't he?
table.
Is it the sheet they put their
Mr.
comments
Call
on?
talked about that in the training.
Does
That's
Chris have?
the Utah land use has a statement that they give to cities to read before they
Okay.
begin meetings. I think, you know,
Generally,
fortunately,
that's kind of read in at the
Yeah.
beginning if you do it.
yeah, fortunately, that only case that I've had is, in my situation, was the day that I had to ask the gentleman either
Mhm,
silence or leave. And
mhm.
of course, he wasn't very gracious with his words, but
Yeah,
I'm a big boy. I can take that. But
yeah.
the biggest thing that's been hard for me is the accusations that I would take a bribe, and that
Oh,
was just,
yeah.
my
You're being
ethics.
paid by
I'm
somebody.
sorry, my ethics just,
Yeah.
yeah. mean
There's
too
been a
much.
lot of that recently.
Well, and it's
Yeah.
just, it's only the last 6 months that I've ever had it occur.
Yeah.
But one of those was in writing by one of the individuals that we've discussed.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and if something like that was really happening, there's an appropriate forum for those things to
Correct.
be addressed. And in a public hearing, or in any kind of a public,
Right.
you know, publication is not the place for that. to be
Well, it's,
aired.
as you know, Counselor, I've called you on some occasions and said, okay, I have these concerns about my business relationships.
Right.
To make sure that I'm being ethical and upfront about it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And I know Shelley's brought it up. You asked, I'll make a decision on it. Remember one day, I'll even make the banking decision.
And
Is it
just,
appropriate?
and on that, in a nutshell, if we're just to give you a rule of thumb on potential conflicts of interest, it's really easy. You just have to know that you have an obligation to disclose. So if you suspect that you have some kind of a conflict of interest that's coming before the planning commission, your obligation is to disclose that. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can do that in writing by filing a form with the city. You can do that at the beginning of the meeting. Once you have disclosed something like that, you have satisfied your legal obligation. You can then go forward and you can fulfill your responsibility. Now, that said, if you're ever uncomfortable, voting on a particular item because of a conflict of interest, or even because of a perception of a conflict of interest, I'll be the first one to say, if you are uncomfortable, do not participate. Just abstain, that there's nothing wrong with that. That's something that you can decide personally to do. I did that a few times as a city council person. So sometimes that's best, just to avoid,
Just to avoid any perception.
yeah, but you don't have any legal obligation to do that.
You remove yourself from that. vote
Right.
Yeah.
On that particular item.
Well, there's a few of us that just because of family relations and stuff that comes up often.
Right. So.
I think it's important that we understand that we have to hear what people say.
Yeah.
We absolutely have to hear it. That's what
They
they're
have that
entitled
right.
to.
Yep.
And if we start the meeting by saying, calm down, nobody get upset, it sort of sets the tone immediately. And so we have to be able, I don't know, I just think it's
That's a good,
important
that's a good perspective. I hadn't thought about that.
that people feel like they're heard.
Yeah.
Can't always do what, I can't do what I want to do, but
Supposed to be peaceable, right?
Yeah.
Peacefully protest.
But that's important. That's exactly, Shelley, that's exactly why we're a commission of our peers. So that we can have our opinions and we can share them with each other. Because I appreciate what your perspective is there. We're setting a tone that might be derogatory by making a reading like that. I know that that was one of the things that we talked about in that training.
Well, I think we want to hear from them, but they need to,
not,
just like we're careful, we have to select our wording. They should, not just say whatever they want,
I agree.
and
I
throw
don't
people
mean
under the bus.
personal attacks, we
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
hear, that's not what I'm
Right.
saying, but
Right. They should have somewhat of a filter, and some people will get that, but some
Yeah.
don't.
What about this option? What if we don't read the statement, but if we start the public hearing and the tone is going that way? We stop it and read it and say, hey, folks, we need to realize this is a public hearing. We want to hear you, but there's some stipulations and rules that you have to follow too.
Well, and you and I can talk, we
Yeah.
know if we're going to have items that
We do.
draw a big group, and we know certain ones. And maybe when we know that this chamber is going to be full for a certain item, we read that statement at the beginning of that item,
Be
just to
selective,
refresh
yeah.
everybody, just to remind. I
Well,
think that's fair.
I also,
So-
it's interesting, you say, you called me, I always tell people, okay, I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
I always do. I want to hear what people have to say.
Well, some people get upset when they're the 21st person and they've said the same thing 5 or 6 times. It's like, what do you have new to share with us? If you're saying the same thing over and over, that's where you can cut. That's usually the only time you can say
It's the only
that.
time I've done it.
They usually coach them up.
Yeah.
Get,
Yeah.
get a spokesman,
Yeah.
so that 12 of you don't have to get.
Well, we had one
Just get
public
one.
hearing where 25 people spoke to the issue. 2 of them were repeats. And then we had a second where 17 people got up. So
Yeah.
42 people got to express opinions in 2 meetings. They were given their time. So.
You, as the chair, you definitely can set the tone, and I've sat through enough public hearings to recognize that, some really horrible public hearings, but honestly, some really good ones, where people, even if they're emotional and upset, they still have constructive things to share. And that's what we want.
Mhm.
It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be emotional, but we want to be respectful and constructive, and if we can invite people to do that and discourage the other, then we're doing really good.
And there seems to be some opinions out there, and that's a great point too, of you don't agree with me. Why are you here? What is it you do as a job? We're telling you, and we heard this in a recent public hearing, how many times have we told you we don't want this? We don't want this. A sign, clapping and all that. Well, that's not how it works, because you guys decide you don't want it, or a certain person doesn't want it, or you also get you're an official and you don't care about the city because you don't agree with me. I believe that you don't care about the city because you're not in agreement with me on this particular issue. It's like, we can agree to disagree and still get along. We're not going to come into agreement. These are some of the things I've heard lately. I heard that second one very recently. It's like, wow,
Yeah, this week.
has someone gotten their way their whole life? Because it doesn't always work that way. A lot of times you're told no. It's not always, the decision you may want. But we can agree to disagree and still get along at the end of the day. That's the hope. But some people just feel it's their way or the highway, and it just doesn't work that way.
I think a lot of people get an expectation that that does work, because it does in some places. You come in there and scream, and then they get what they want, so they get the expectation that that's gonna happen. And that's kind of where I think a lot of people come from, is expectations that it will stop what they don't want happening or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
The louder I can be, the more I can be heard and pull it my
Yeah, the
direction.
more people you get in the room, the more heat there is, the more likely it is to be shut down
Yeah.
per their wishes or whatever.
Well, and it's there, the important thing too for us is to remember there's gotta be a balance of all that, correct?
Mhm.
Because I remember one of our public hearings, one of the parties said, well, did the developer invite you here tonight? Well, he had every right to bring people in his behalf as much as the people that were just opposing it, right? And so we have to remember that we have to keep a balance of what's, everybody has an opinion. And they all have a right to have that opinion. And we all have a right to share that opinion. It doesn't mean that it's gonna be the way things change because they have.
Right.
Okay.
No, and that's a good point. And usually it's about 10-1, the squeaky wheel gets the grease they believe. And so the naysayers come out in droves, and then the ones that support, I'm okay with it. They don't come out as much, but sometimes a developer might bring a few people with them that's in favor of the project. They have a right to do that if they choose to do so. Matt?
So, yeah, the one other subject I wanted to touch on, and I know this is something you've heard many times before, and that is the difference between a legislative and an administrative decision. And this is relevant to the Planning Commission because really every decision that you make is administrative in nature. There are no legislative decisions that are left to the Planning Commission. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is it's actually improper for administrative decisions to be based solely on what's called public clamor, which is, public emotion and comment and whatnot. And there's Utah case law that clearly says that if it's an administrative type land use decision and it was decided solely on that basis, it's improper. And so, hearing some of that as has been discussed recently and comments made by certain planning commissioners, obviously people have been upset with that, but that's the reality of it. That is your role. On the other hand, the city council as a legislative body, they absolutely can take into account public clamor. They can take into account public comments. And so part of your purpose is to take in all of that comment that comes in a public hearing, make a record of it so that it's available for the city council to review. And, the comments that were made by some of the public saying, well, why can't we have a public hearing at the city council? I'd be the first one to admit it is kind of interesting, that the public hearing is required at your level versus at the city council level. But that's the procedure that the statute lays out for those types of decisions. And so in your role as an administrative body, as an advisory body, as a recommending body, that's part of what you do is you gather that information, you evaluate, the application that's before you, and you make a recommendation if it's going to be a decision ultimately made by the city council. But there are some decisions that you are the final deciding body, like on most conditional use permit applications, for example.
Site plan, conditional use,
Yeah.
signs.
Yeah. The other thing that distinguishes those two types of decisions is there's, if there was ever a legal challenge to the decision that was made, that's being made, there's a different standard to challenge a legislative decision versus an administrative decision. And it's an important distinction because as the legislative body, the city council is given a very, very broad amount of discretion to make decisions. And so they can, essentially a decision made by the city council won't generally be overturned by a court unless it's illegal, arbitrary and capricious. And that's it. There's no other reason. that a
But
court
that
would-
kind of challenge goes to district court.
That,
of a
those
legislature.
challenges go straight to the district court. Now, let's say that you're making a decision on a conditional use permit application. It's an administrative decision. And so there is an appeals process that if you make a decision, it could be appealed to, in our case, it would go to basically an administrative judge.
Hearing
A
officer.
hearing officer.
Uh-huh.
Which we just cleaned that ordinance up
We
Yep.
did.
6 months ago.
Yep.
But the standard that your decision would be reviewed under is different. It's not the same standard as a city council decision. And it's a standard that requires substantial evidence. So if you decide to approve a conditional use permit application, and then someone appeals that, says that was an improper decision, they would have to show that that decision was not supported by substantial evidence.
And they have to provide all that substantial evidence and a record and submit the application, and then they have to.
So it's not our
present-
job to disprove it, it's their
No,
job to prove it.
No, they have to present. and
Or they
prove
have
to
to
the
show,
hearing
or they
officer.
have to show that there wasn't sufficient evidence to justify your decision. So there's still a level of deference given to your decisions. It's just not as broad as the deference that's given to the city council. So that's only going to come into play in certain circumstances, right? Because when you're making recommendations to the city council, that's not an appealable decision. Because you're not the final decider, right? You're making a recommendation, it's going to city council, they will decide. And it doesn't become appealable until they decide. But those certain decisions like conditional use permits, I think variances is another one that you make the final decisions on.
Site plan review.
Site plan reviews, those kinds of things.
Was that the silo Verizon?
Yeah, that was a conditional use for the telecommunications in the beautiful silo, nicest one I've ever seen.
Yeah, that one was a little different because it fell under our telecommunications facilities ordinance. And so it kind of had its own separate procedure. So it was kind of a unique creature, but generally it followed a similar path, right? There was a decision here, it was appealed and it had to go. In that case, it was reviewed by the city council before it was taken to court, so. Anyway, any questions about that? I know that's really general and it's probably stuff you've all heard before, but I do think it helps kind of give context to what your purpose is, right? It's not, your purpose is not to reflect the opinion of the public in any way, frankly. Sounds harsh to say that, but that's really the case. You know, your job.
That's for zone changes too, right?
That's generally. for
In our
zone changes.
position, not necessarily the city council position, but
That's right. Yeah, your role in those applications is very different from the city council. You know, your role is to review the application, to make a recommendation based on, you know, the evidence that's before you, the standards that we have. And then the city council takes that and all the other information that's gathered, including the public comment that was received, including any recommendations or feedback from staff, any advice from, you know, outside advisors that are brought in.
Which on these legislative matters, it's a team effort, you know, Matt's
Yeah.
involved in that with staff and, you know, TRC and other city staff. So,
There's so many boxes to check
Yeah.
along the way.
Yeah.
Right?
and basically it's determining if the application is complete. You have the materials, we're in compliance with codes, the general plan, all of those type of things that
Yeah.
we've discussed. Then you're recommending that it move forward to the council. They ultimately make the decision on a legislative matter.
The other thing I'll just point out that I think kind of emphasizes this is any decisions that you have final authority over, like conditional uses or variances or site plan reviews, none of those things require a public hearing.
Correct.
So
And
I think that supports the idea that, you're not really here to.
And the other big
Public
change
opinion.
that's coming, and you know this, and I know Logan probably knows this, is the planning commission is the land use authority. You'll be the approval authority for subdivisions. And so that's going to be in place. So there will not be recommendations by the planning commission to the council for preliminary subdivision plat approval. That'll be done here. Preliminary plat approval by the planning commission. And then the final plat approval is administrative with staff, the engineered drawings and all of that and signing of the plat. Those won't be going, come early next year, won't be going to city council anymore.
That'll be an adjustment, but it's really not inconsistent with what the law
Right.
already is. Those are already considered administrative decisions.
And some cities have already been doing that. To be
Yeah,
honest with you, some of the bigger cities, they already let the planning commission do it that way.
Sandy does it that way.
They do. And I processed subdivision plats for at least a decade there. I did other things.
Oh, that's
but-
right. Yeah.
Yes, but Sandy City, the approval authority for subdivisions was the planning commission. Whether it was a preliminary plat, a final plat, a PUD, all of that went through the planning commission, and then you finalized that with staff. So it's kind of changed to that. The council's already aware of it. Lane and Matheson, some of the others, they know the statute and the changes that are moving forward with that. And that's going to be a big one. And really, it's kind of the approach up on the hill with our lawmakers is going through a process, but streamlining a little bit because the words got back to them about all the delays, the cost and everything else. So you see this, the one public hearing at planning commission and then a public meeting at council, right? That's one thing. Subdivision plat, rather than going to planning commission and then to city council, it should now just going to go to planning commission. So, some of this is being streamlined for better or worse, but it is being streamlined. So,
anyway,
yeah,
I feel like we've been
Helpful?
talking
Has
a
this been
lot. so-
helpful?
we'll do more of these.
I have one question. I think your idea about training for 5 minutes at the beginning is awesome. If there are people here, it's good for us, but it would be even better for the public.
Yes, as I discussed it, thought about it and having the public here, hey, we're making the effort to be trained in digital things.
Well, the one comment from city council a couple of weeks ago, Ms. Webster said, how do I learn this stuff? Can she go on the land use stuff and
Absolutely. It's
read
on
it?
our website.
That kind of seems like what we all need to do.
And that's interesting because when I was first getting my real estate license 100 years ago, I wanted to learn more. It wasn't readily accessible. So I had to go gather it and go spend time with the title guys.
Most of her questions, I thought, well, I learned that on that video I watched. Or I
Yeah.
learned that on that video, or they explained it anyway. Or
But she and others have been on our website and a lot of it's right there. It's just, you
There's
got to
quite-
look.
all our
around.
ordinances
All
are
the
right.
ordinance, city
website.
code and land use ordinances are all right there. You just
And-
have to do a little research.
Easily
So-
researchable on the city website too. Even now that it's been updated, it's even better. Anybody have any more questions you want to answer? Well, this is a good segue into what we.
Yeah.
One-
Let's
you know,
do it
okay.
again.
One thing I would say is don't be afraid if you don't have, an expert grasp on all this.
Yeah.
I do this for a living and this is right next to my desk. I pull it out, I reference it to refresh my memory about stuff all the time. And so, we use the resources we have. You are volunteers, you're not expected to,
can I ask one more clarification then? I
course.
am a beginner and I'm not
No,
an
beginner's great.
expert, but
We all were sitting in your chair once.
when you're talking about a decision that's at our level and not to take public comment, just by the application, if it meets the application rules, or I don't know how you say that. Some of those decisions are more policy decisions or what's best for the community decisions. Are you saying that's not our place at all?
Not really.
So it's just application?
I would think you'd take public comments where they're pertinent to actual planning, not just emotion. It's like if they're talking about like maybe there's like a road, or where a road would connect or something, or there's like a parking issue or something like that, that could be something actually related to planning that you should take into account, that maybe the applicant, you don't, for the applicant did address that. That would be something that you would probably say,
Yeah.
but like a pure emotion, say, we don't want this, that's not planning.
And so that's the division between information and the stuff they're trying to get across versus the emotion and the public clamor. And so what we heard in that council meeting is people were kind of flipping that around and speaking out of turn, because in no way, shape, or form was the motion made that said, it's out of my hands, we're going to move forward. It's going to be a legislative decision. It's that he understood, or he or she understood the public clamor, but you had to get to the meat and potatoes and see that the application was complete. It met the general plan. You could check all the boxes, and that legislative decision was to be made by the council on the final decision. It wasn't the clamor because they all hate it and you're not listening to us, right? It's not the popular vote. And so the people that said that were speaking out of turn and misquoting somebody, and that's unfortunate. I mean, it's all there for you to go listen. Everything's there. You can
I've
go
already
and
listened
listen
to it. It was.
I've listened to
Well, it was
that.
on.
Yeah, I've listened to that 10 or 12 times now because I just want to,
To make sure.
yeah.
I wasn't
So,
speaking about anything in
Yeah.
specific,
Yeah.
but thank you, that is clarifying.
You know what?
And people have, my thing is
Yeah.
that you gotta remember, people have property rights.
Yeah.
To be able to do
Sure.
within reasons stuff to develop their property, it's their right, whether or not they owned it from Swiss heritage or whether they bought it 10 minutes ago, they still have property rights with that piece of land they own. And so that's something that we have to consider too with
Right.
the application that comes in.
It is. And I would say that becomes relevant only in fairly narrow circumstances. For example, if you have a conditional use permit application that is before you that you need to make a decision on, sometimes a proposed use will have impacts on surrounding properties, right? And that's a real thing. And it's something that needs and should be considered in a lot of situations. Consideration of those impacts and how it might affect surrounding property owners or the general public is appropriate. And so information you might get from the public about what those impacts might be absolutely would be relevant. If it's someone just simply saying, well, I don't like it. I don't like cell towers. It's going to give me cancer. You know what I mean? Like there's certain things that I think are potentially as a planning commission still valid for you to
And that's why
consider and weigh.
right.
And in any given scenario, we can kind of help you.
If
see-
it affects public safety, if it affects.
Health,
Sure.
safety, welfare, and that's
Yeah,
why we have,
absolutely.
we bring conditions to mitigate. the
One of those
impact.
is recently was the towing company, just right here.
That's the one that came to
That
mind.
was the first one that came to mind when you mentioned.
They applied for a towing company where La Bodega is.
They wanted
As a conditional use permit.
and have an impound yard and all that. Well, you end up with a wrecking yard in the middle of the community. That's not.
No, yeah.
And it posed a public safety situation. So
And there's other common.
there are
sense-
things that make it different.
Sure, and there's other common sense considerations too. Certainly, I think the opinion of a next door neighbor is often more relevant than the opinion of the guy that lives, 3 blocks down in a lot of circumstances. And that consideration is actually reflected in state law now. If someone wants to appeal a land use decision, they have to either be an adjacent property owner or someone that can show that they have been more impacted than the general public by that land use decision. That's actually in the state code now. So the guy that lives, half a mile away and just doesn't like the decision no longer has the right to appeal a land use decision unless he can show he's been more impacted than the general public.
But a
What-
person
what-
that's
what's
right next
considered an
to-
impact for some people, like,
Well, that's where.
because there's,
That's
because
where
there's
the
two
debate-
houses across the street from me instead of one, that's a huge impact to you, like,
And that's where the debate happens, and that's where you have to say, is there any real evidence of an impact? And I'm sure there will be court cases, where that have to decide.
It'll
those
change
kinds of
again.
questions.
Yeah, for sure.
But I just bring that up as an example of, we can differentiate between information shared by one member of the public versus another. So the last thing I'll say, maybe just as a suggestion, we've talked about one of your roles as being an information gathering body for the city council. So if you're getting feedback from members of the public about something that ultimately is going to go to the city council, I don't see anything wrong with you saying, hey, thank you for this information. Part of my job as a planning commissioner is to provide information to the city council. I'll make sure this gets to them. And in that way, and I'm happy to put the heat on them. They're the elected officials. They signed up for that. So, if that helps you address any feedback or criticism that you're getting, feel free to say that.
wish you would have, that'd been nice. Only 3 people signed up this year.
Had I known,
One of them was from up Joshua or somewhere,
yeah,
right?
had I known, I'd probably taken a different role, but that's for another day.
18 people in St. George signed up.
No,
You're gonna run for mayor?
I'm not gonna run.
Chair, I think that's what we had for you tonight.
Okay.
So,
Well, this has been great and I appreciate it. With that, let's move on to our regular meeting and go back, we'll finish with our last item 7, approval of minutes. I had a chance to read them. Everything looked great to me.
Looked good to me too. I'd like to make a recommendation that we approve the minutes from July 13th, 2023, as they are written.
I'll second that.
We have a motion from Mr. Councilman Weston and a second from Kristen Walton to approve the minutes from our July 13th meeting. All those in favor say aye.
I,
Any opposed? It carries. We're good. With that, we'll adjourn until our next meeting of
the 24th.
this month.
Yeah, in 2 weeks. I'm not quite sure what we have yet, but I'll let you know, Mark.
I'll be at the lake.
Okay, so
So
we'll see. September stacking up to where we'll have a lot of items. The
Yeah,
two
I'll
meetings
be-
in September,
I'll be at the lake for
the 24th.
12 days
Okay,
this trip.
so
So
you have a satellite. You have a.
so I do have my satellite. So I will zoom in. but
That Starlink.
One of you may have to be the
That's Curtis.
I should be here the
chair.
24th.
We
Do
be
we
here on
need
the
a-
24th. All right.
Do we
I'll
need a
zoom in
motion
for the
to,
meeting.
do we need a motion to adjourn?
Oh,
Or we-
need a motion to adjourn. That's correct.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you.
I learned that from Ben Shakespeare.
Yeah, it's so moved.
Record a vote on that real quick.
Oh, yeah, we need a vote.
Oh.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It carries.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
Jeff,